Hi guys, Grand J here and welcome to another one of our videos. Opus 5 has been out for a little while now, so today we'll be talking about the new Earth cards of Opus 5. So let's get started. First of all, we have Heritable Knight Garland. It's a 7 cost forward, 8,000 power. Brave, when Heritable Knight Garland enters the field, choose one backup of cost 4 more on opponent controls, break it. So after looking at the set a little bit more now, the ability of breaking a backup of cost 4 more actually seems like it's going to trigger off more often than you think. This set has introduced a lot of backups that are around the 4 cost mark. Generally, they're 4 cost backups that allow a player to search the deck or to get cards back from their break zone. So it does seem like it's going to be more of a metagame right now where you will be able to hit more backups that cost 4 or more. So this card is less niche than I originally gave it credit for, simply because the meta has sort of shifted up. So I do think that you'll be able to trigger off this ability a little bit more often. That being said, we have spoken about this in one of the earlier spoilers. The fact that it costs 7 is a little bit expensive. So for Brave 8,000, you kind of expect a forward to cost 4, and on top of this, you're basically getting a Hecaton care attached to this body in order to do this ability. So this card is not too bad. But yeah, at 7 costs is a little bit expensive. If it was at 6, I definitely think it would be much better. The big issue is that, being cost 7, it means that you have to spend cards from your hand in order to play this card. So you have to spend some amount of backups, like 5 backups, and you have to at least discard 1 card from your hand, or tap less backups and discard more cards from your hand. If this card was a little bit cheaper, then I definitely think that this card would see more play, because it'd just be a good value card, in the sense that if it costs, say, 6, it could be 2 backups, discard a card, you're breaking one of your opponent's backups, even though may not be it may not be like one of those really important backups. The fact that you're just setting your opponent 1 backup as well as having a body on a more efficient body is actually pretty good. But the fact that it costs 7 is just a tad too expensive. If it cost 6, also it would have had synergy with the new Star Sybil card. But as it is right now, costing 7 is a little too much. And the fact that there's a big jump from costing 5 to costing 6 to costing 7, those very minute jumps actually makes this card a little bit more difficult to play. By all means, it's not a bad card, but it was just 1 or 2 notches off of being good. Next, we have Incas, and this is the third card we've talked about in this cycle of Warrior Lights. So Incas is a free cost 7,000 power forward, just like the other ones. Drop Warrior Light forwards you control and Earth forwards other than Incas get plus 1,000 power. So of course, this does lend itself to the Warrior Light deck or a Mono Earth deck. It's got secondary ability of dull a total of 3 active forwards or Earth backups. Choose 1 forward, it gains plus 2,000 power until the end of turn. This, I think, is probably the generally most useful of the Warrior Light abilities. Tapping 3 of your Earth backups or forwards is a pretty reasonable cost. So really, in effect, it's kind of like free CP, or you can sort of tap forwards as well. The reason why this is better in an Earth deck is because a lot of Earth forwards tend to have Brave, so you will be able to attack with your forwards and then be able to use them to tap for additional abilities later on. So this cost is actually more reasonable than you may think. On top of that, plus 2,000 power, it's actually a very good buff, and it can be used to protect your guys in combat, or it can be used to protect your guys from damage abilities. So this is a very versatile and very good card, and definitely because of other little bits of support, Warrior Lights is generally going to be primarily an Earth deck, or at least a large part of the Warrior Light deck will be Earth. So this card is going to be an auto include for pretty much any Warrior Light deck, and for Earth decks, it's going to be very good as well. So definitely pick up your set of Inguses, because they're going to be very good. Next, we have the first Earth Legendary. It is Wall, or Warrior of Light. Do note that its name is called is Wall, so it doesn't conflict with the existing forward called Warrior of Light. It's a 4 cost forward at 8,000 power, so it's on curve. At the beginning of your attack phase, select 2 of the 4 following options. Choose 1 forward against Brave. Choose 1 forward against plus 2,000 power until the end of turn. Choose 1 dull forward, deal it 3,000 damage, or all forwards cannot be chosen by summon EX Burst or character EX Burst this turn. And this card is a really powerful card. So first of all, the fact that it says at the beginning of your attack phase, choose 2, means that you get an ability straight away as long as you play it during your main phase 1. So you have an immediate impact from him. At the very least, you can play this down and immediately you're able to give one of your pre-existing forwards Brave and plus 2,000 power. So that's a pretty solid buff by itself. Generally means any 2 to 3 cost forward will generally be able to fight most evenly against most four cost forwards, and the fact that it gives a brave is pretty solid as well. And generally, outside of that, giving all forwards the ability to not be chosen by EX Burst is really, really, really strong. So yeah, EX Burst is one of those things that you generally can't avoid or you generally can't deal with very well in this game. So this is a great way for you to hedge your bets to prevent your guys from being able to be destroyed by EX Burst. Everyone knows the feeling of attacking and then randomly your opponent gets a really strong EX Burst, whether it's a Raubahn, whether it's an Odin, and you feel that like you've just lost the game because of like pure random chance. And this warrior like gives players, especially more players that are more wary of these sort of things, a way to deal with that. Do note that it says that all forwards cannot be chosen by summons or summon or character EX Burst, so that does include your opponent's forwards as well. So buffing EX Burst, such as like Golem, such as Sylph, these cannot choose your opponent's forwards. Even stuff like Belias, they can't choose both their forwards or your forwards. So yeah, it does lock out a lot of EX Burst. So pretty much any EX Burst that requires to choose a forward, your Warrior Light locks them out. So this is an extremely powerful and extremely versatile card. It's got amazingly good artwork. I nicknamed this card Kenshiro because it looks like that guy from the anime. So yeah, this is like by far the most relevant and the most sought after legend for this set. If you have not picked up your copies of him already, then you're going to be in a bit of trouble because these guys are going to be very good, and as soon as people realize how good this card is, it's going to be significantly more difficult to pick these guys up. Next, we have Botanist. It's a free cost backup. When Botanist enters the field, choose one character you control, select one character with the same name in your break zone, and add it to your hand. So, first of all, a clarification that was recently made online by Kageyama was that both Magic Pot and Botanist, when they say choose one character, it has to be a unique character. So it can't be a character with that with the army icon in the top right. So it has to be a unique character. So for example, Botanist or most like all standard units have that icon in the top right corner, which means you have multiple copies of them on the field. Botanist and Magic Pot aren't able to interact with these specific characters because supposedly it was an unintended interaction or like an overpowered interaction. So basically, the way to look at this card is that effectively it is like a more conditional Sage that's in Earth. So Sage was a 4-cost backup that allows you to like put any character card from your break zone back to your hand. Botanist allows you to do it for one less. The caveat being is that you need to have a character already on the field with that name. When you really sort of break it down, that does have some limitations. So if generally you're going to be using it to pick up another copy of a forward they have on the field, because if you already have a uniquely named backup on the field, picking up an extra copy back to your hand isn't going to be useful because you can't play it. Generally, you'll be using it for S ability if you do it in this case. That being said, though, that's where Botanist really sort of comes into play. If you have powerful forwards or even powerful backups with special abilities, then Botanist is going to allow you to recycle those cards back to your hand to reuse those abilities. So there are quite a few like really strong S abilities in Earth already, whether it's on Delita, whether it's on Vincent, or whether it's on Yang. These are all pretty strong, and Botanist fits into that really well. The fact that it costs free is pretty solid, so effectively it kind of becomes a one-cost backup, as long as you can fulfill the condition of having a character to put back to your hand. Although that being said, it's a little bit more difficult, a little bit more nichier to do in the early game, simply because you don't have that many cards in your break zone, and you need to have a forward or you need to have a character already on the field with that same name as a card that you're willing to pick up. So this card is a lot more situational. But yeah, that being said, it's not a bad card. It's like it's a little bit more niche, and so generally you're only going to be playing these cards in decks that have forwards of when you're playing multiple forwards of the same name, when you really sort of focus on using those S abilities. But when you do trigger it off, this is actually like a pretty solid card. Next, we have Carbuncle. This is one of those cards that really has people sort of conflicted of how good this card is. It's a 2-cost summon. Choose one forward against plus 2,000 power until the end of the turn. If its power becomes 9,000 or less, return Carbuncle to your hand. So yeah, this is a card that's really going to build a certain archetype. It's not going to be a summon that you can just sort of auto-include in all your Earth decks. Yeah, because yeah, you generally, in order to play carbuncle effectively, you generally want to be playing forwards at around the 6,000, 7,000 power mark, and you're able to bump them up from like 6,000, 7,000 up to 8,000, 9,000, and recur carbuncle to your hand. People have said, oh yeah, like you can play carbuncle multiple times a turn. Yes, that is true. But you are spending CP to do it. So yes, you can spend multiple of your backups in order to do it, but you aren't getting any sort of additional field pressure by doing it, and you're spending CP to just boost your guys temporarily. So you're not moving the game forward. Definitely as a combat trick, and having it as just a regular combat trick is really quite good. And yeah, in any sort of deck where you're playing those smaller to mid-range guys, this is going to be a huge boost to them. Earth actually synergizes with this pretty well because Earth has generally the best, the most powerful 2-cost forwards. Generally, most of them are around the 6,000, 7,000 power mark, and they usually have Brave. So cards like WRO Member, cards like Prish, cards like 2-cost Yang. These are all cards that are going to be 6,000, 7,000 power. And yeah, having Carbuncle to boost them up, that's just a sweet spot of being base 6,000, base 7,000, and allowing Carbuncle to push them to 9,000, which allows you to put Carbuncle back up to your hand. So this is going to push a certain archetype. And then if you take it one step further with all these 2-cost Earth forwards, if you then combine it with, say, a ice card like Shulk, you're getting really good value, really good tempo for that as well. So I think, yeah, Carbuncle is not going to see play in in a lot of Earth decks, but yeah, the 2-cost Earth deck is really going to be powerful with this card. Something to note with Carbuncle though is that if the forward, your opponent can destroy the forward in response, which is generally going to be easier if you're using this on smaller forwards. So if you try to use Carbuncle on one of your forwards and your opponent uses some sort of destruction ability to respond to it and destroy your forward, on resolution, because there's no forward that this card is targeting, then this card fizzles out and you don't pick it up back to your hand. So against smarter players, they might lay certain traps for you in the sense that they might predict that you might use Carbuncle, they respond, blow up your forward, and it also fizzles out your Carbuncle as well. So do take that in mind. Another good thing about this card is that it is Earth, and it is an Earth summon. So there are synergies with Earth cards in the form of Rydia, that Earth backup that allows you to search your deck for an Earth summon. So if you are playing this strategy, you can very consistently keep Carbuncle in your hand as well. So yeah, so this card is a very strong card, but definitely it's a very niche card in certain decks. But in those decks, it's going to really push them up forward by a lot. Next, we have Gabranth, and this is, again, another powerful card, but again, for a sort of nichier deck. So it's a 4-cost, 8,000 power forward, but if you have received 5 points of damage or more, the cost of playing Gabranth for the field is reduced by 3, so it becomes a 1-cost, 8,000 power forward, which is hugely value. And then it's got a secondary ability of put Gabranth into a break zone. During this turn, the next damage dealt to you becomes 0 this turn. So this card is definitely like one of those cards that sort of falls into the Earth archetype of Dark Knights and receiving your own damage. And yeah, so previously we've seen a lot of Earth Dark Knight cards that increase their power from having more damage. Cecil, which was a Dark Knight that dealt damage whenever you receive damage, and previous Gabranths, which reduced their cost or got more powerful the more damage you received. And this sort of just builds into that synergy again. And so yeah, this is a really good value card. The fact that you can play it as just by itself as a 1 CP forward is just really good value, especially if your opponent is like an overly aggressive deck. Anytime towards the mid-late game, this card is going to be like a cheap 8,000 power forward. Assumably, you're going to play some buff, a field buff like Anna Crow, which puts it up to 9,000, which is yeah, really good value. Next, this was something was clarified about this card, is that this ability of preventing the next damage dealt to you. Usually, you will receive only 1 damage at a time, so it will protect you from 1 damage if you are like attacked by your opponent's forwards. But there's an interesting synergy with Zodiac, the Keeper of Precepts, that's summoned from Opus 3, where yeah, you destroy all your opponent's forwards, and then you take damage for every forward that of your opponent that you destroyed. Gabranth actually, its ability to prevent damage prevents that entire summon's worth of damage. So that's actually something that's really powerful. I actually didn't think it worked this way, but yeah. But what I found online is that yeah, it prevents all the damage. So it's really powerful, and it's a really strong synergy. Yeah, especially if you got like a dark forward on the field. Zodiac becomes a 4-cost summon, destroys all your opponent's forwards, and if you combine it with Gabranth, you take no damage whatsoever. So it's a really strong combination, really strong synergy. Really looking forward to building and playing this deck. Yeah, so definitely it's a very strong card, and it's just a rare as well. So it's very easy to pick up. Everyone has access to it. Next, we have Carbina. It is a 4-cost monster. For Earth 1, until the end of turn, Carbina becomes a forward with 7,000 power. When Carbina is put from the field into break zone, return Carbina onto the field dull. You can only use this ability once per turn. So a couple of things to clarify. So when it says you can only use this ability once per turn, so that's once for that one copy, that specific copy or instance of that card. So after like you transform it into forward, and if it is destroyed and it comes back on the field, you can use its ability again. So you can't transform it into a forward again, even though it's going to be dull. So that is something to note. And yeah, and so like and so if you put it back on the field, you can use its ability again. So the best comparison for this card is Vanille, an Opus 1 card, which is 4 cost 7k. And yeah, so when Vanille was put from the field in the break zone, you can remove a Hecaton Care from your deck in order to put her back from the field back from the break zone onto the field. So in that effect, they and they're both 7,000 power forward. So in that way, they're both very similar in their function. But Carbina, the con is that she does have to pay Earth 1 every time you want to put her, every time you want to change her into forward. And the con of Vanille is that you have to have multiple Hecaton Cares in your deck in order to trigger off the ability. So if you so that's how you sort of compare these two. If you want to use this card multiple times, you can effectively do this card multiple times in the game because you're not limited to how many Hecatons are left in your deck. Now, if you compare that to Vanille, she is cheaper in that you don't have to constantly pay this this Earth 1 cost every time you want to trigger off its ability. But at the same time, you do have a limited number of uses of her in your deck. So like looking back from previous experience, Vanille typically, even if you're running 6 copies of Hecaton Care, at the lower end, you might expect to be able to trigger off her revival ability maybe 2 times a game. And then on the higher end, you might expect to trigger off her ability probably 3 to 4 times in a game. So generally, in a game with 1 Vanille, you'll be able to revive her 2 to 4 times, depending on your luck. Now, Carbina, you can revive her multiple times, but you have to keep paying her cost, right? Now, if you consider that Vanille can, let's say on the low end, revives twice, for Carbina to sort of revive twice, you would have had to pay an additional Earth 1 as well. So you would have had to pay an extra 4 CP just to bring her back the same amount of times that Vanille is brought back. If Vanille's brought back the 3rd or 4th time, Carbina would have chewed up 8 additional CP in order to do the same thing. So it's only really after like 8 to 10 additional CP on top of Vanille that Carbina becomes more efficient than Vanille. And so when you sort of take that into consideration, Carbina actually becomes quite costly, and in a lot of cases you'd rather just play Vanille. So yeah, after you sit down and do the maths, Carbina does tend to be weaker than Vanille. Although yes, it is a monster, so there are some synergies with it that way. But unless your synergies for being a monster significantly outweighs the cost, I would go for Vanille over Carbina most of the time. Next, we have Graviton. It's a 3-cost backup. When you cast an Earth Summon, choose 1 forward you control against plus 2,000 power until the end of turn. Now, this is a pretty solid backup. Yeah, being able to give you guys plus 2,000 power whenever you cast Summon is pretty good. So people have been sort of like theory crafting of Graviton with Carbuncle. So yeah, that allows you to push one of your 5-cost forwards into plus 2,000 from Graviton and plus 2,000 from Carbuncle. So that's a lot of buff for a very minor cost. And of course, these 2 cards synergize very well. Obviously, there is a limitation of they have to be 5-cost forwards in order to allow you to put Carbuncle to your hand. So overall, Graviton is a pretty solid backup. The fact that it does require you to play Earth Summons does limit its scope a little bit. So if it just said any summon, then this card would be much stronger in some other colors, potentially Earth Water. But yeah, the fact that it does limit to Earth Summons does limit its scope a little bit. The fact that it is a 3-cost backup also makes it a little bit expensive. Generally, your 3-cost backups are quite valuable, and they're quite game breaking. They usually have a very good effect on the game. And not to say that this card doesn't have a super good effect on the game, but Earth Summons don't generally tend to sort of like play into this backup particularly well, I think, personally. So yeah, so I think this card is solid, but I'm not sure if it's what Earth needs. Next, we have one of the super versatile new cards, Cockatrice. It is a 1-cost summon EX burst. Choose 1 forward during your turn. During this turn, it cannot attack or block and doesn't receive any damage. Now, this is an unbelievably versatile new card. So it's very similar to the 2-cost summon Titan from Opus 1, in that it does protect your forward. So in this case, it doesn't dull your forward. It doesn't dull the forward. It just makes so that forward cannot attack or block. But if that forward is already in combat, then it doesn't remove it from combat. So if the forward is already attacking or the forward is already blocking, using a Cockatrice will prevent it from receiving any damage, but will still allow it to resolve that attack or resolve that block. In addition to this, it also chooses one forward, and it doesn't have to choose your own forward. So you can use this card offensively as well. So if your opponent does have a problematic blocker, you can choose their forward. That forward cannot block that turn. It may not receive any damage, but allows you to attack through if there's a problematic blocker. So this is a really versatile card on both offense and defense. You can use this when your opponent uses some sort of damage ability to try to destroy your forward to protect it, even though it doesn't get the block for that turn. And it's just a 1-cost summon, and it's an EX burst as well. This is unbelievably good. There'll be times where your opponent's attacking you with, say, 2 guys, and the first one attacks, you EX burst a Cockatrice, you just make the other forward unable to attack for the turn, and you save yourself a damage at least. So this card has so many good versatile uses, whether it's on EX burst, whether you're playing it on offense or defense. This card is extremely versatile. While it itself doesn't destroy anything or like give any buffs in like power buffs, this card is actually super versatile, and like any Earth deck that I play moving forward, I would like highly consider playing 1 or 2 copies of this in the decks just for the value it brings. Next, we have Miner. It is a 4-cost backup. When Miner enters the field, choose one backup in your break zone, add it to your hand. Then for Earth 1 Dull, put Miner into a break zone, choose one forward in your break zone, add it to your hand. So this is a really cool backup. So at 4 costs, it does get you a card back, so it does effectively become a pseudo 2-cost backup. So yeah, so that's pretty solid by itself, and you can use to pick up backups, from your break zone back to your hand. And there are certain decks that do want to recycle backups. In addition, it can also break itself to return a forward back to your hand. So this is really good in that it allows you to recur a lot of your strategy. So if you're one of those decks that builds its strategy around specific forwards or specific backups, Miner will allow you to recur those forwards to use additional S abilities to play them again, and it also allows you to recur backups. Now, where this card I think really shines is being able to pick up backups that have strong interplay abilities, but also have abilities that break themselves. Now, there's not a lot of backups that do that, but for the backups that do that, Miner becomes a really good synergy with them. So one of the cards to compare to like combo this with is Sybil. So it's a card that allows you to search for a category 11 character when it enters play, and then it's also got an ability to break itself for a powerful effect as well. Another card that this card combos really well into is Minfilia, which is that new Final Fantasy 14 card, which supports the Silence of the Seventh Dawn. So Miner works really well with that as well. And so you have this really cool synergy of using the backups, putting the backups into play, using their abilities, and then using Miner to pick them back up. And also you can then break Miner later on to put a forward back into your hand. So of course Miner starts Sybil, and then you can sort of combine that in with Prish as well. So the 6-cost Prish puts when she dies, she puts a copy of herself from your hand onto the field, and of course Miner's secondary ability of putting a forward from your break zone back to your hand synergizes and combos with that really well, and it just combos really well with this entire package. So that's that makes it one of those cards I really want to try out in the new set. Really excited to try out Miner with some Star Sybil with some interesting Earth-based shenanigans. So the next card is Cyclone Enforcer. It is a 3-cost forward at 7,000 power. When Cyclone Enforcer enters the field, choose one monster of cost 2 or less than opponent controls, break it. So this card is a pretty solid value card. It's a standard unit which gives it some points, and it is an army card, so it means you can have multiple copies of this forward on the field at the same time. And yeah, this is actually a pretty good value card in that it's a forward that's on curve, being 3 for 7. And also, yeah, its ability to destroy a monster of 2 or less actually is pretty solid. So you're not really sort of paying anything extra for that ability, and you're also just getting a body on curve. And yeah, and so like previously from the from Opus 4 metagame, not every deck was playing monsters, but now monsters actually have a lot of very good value, especially a lot of the 2-cost monsters that have dull abilities that are really going to be quite annoying to deal with, whether it's a Jesper, whether it's a Ghoul, whether it's a Cactuar. There are so many really good 2-cost or less monsters that have ongoing abilities, and Cyclone is a very easy and efficient way to deal with them. Also, any sort of 2-cost or less backup, especially those auto trigger backups, Cyclone can deal with those as well. So this card is very, very solid. Yeah, so just like how Earth tends to like play 1 or 2 Hecaton cares, like the Opus 1 Hecaton cards just for situations where it might come in handy. Cyclone Enforcer, I think, going forward will be in Earth decks, like 1 or 2 copies just for monsters, because most decks will have a monster in their deck, and Cyclone is just going to be a really efficient way to get rid of them. So next we have Cyclone Warden. It's a free cost forward at 3000 power. When Cyclone Warden enters the field, you may search for a card named Cyclone Warden and add it to your hand. For each Cyclone Warden you control, Cyclone Warden gets plus 2000 power. So effectively this becomes a 1 cost backup because you are getting a Cyclone Warden from it. And it does give itself plus 2000 power for each one of these you have on the field. So by itself, you are getting a 1 cost 5000 power forward, which is on paper pretty decent value. But there are some caveats with it. Obviously, there's only 1 copy of Cyclone Warden in the game right now, so you can only have like 3 copies of it in your deck. So the first 2, like in a best case scenario, the first 2 will be 1 cost forwards because you're getting 2 CP back, or you're getting card back from its ability. But the third Cyclone Warden that you put down will be full cost in the sense that you don't have any more from your deck that you can put back to your hand. And so like when you think about it that way, yes, you can put 1 down. And it becomes a 1 cost 5000 power forward. You put another 1 down, so that's another 1 cost forward, which makes them both 7000s. So you're paying 2 CP to get 2 7000 power forwards, which is actually pretty solid, although potentially a little bit fragile. And then you can chuck on another 3 CP on top to make them all 9000 power forwards. And this is in an ideal world though. So any situation where you do like pick up 2 of these in your hand, you feel really, really bad because you can play one of them, add another Cyclone Warden to your hand, and then you've got 2 that you have to play at full cost. So right now, because of that, yes, it is decent value, but it's not game breaking enough to really sort of build a deck around, and there's not much more you can sort of do with this. There's no other Cyclone Wardens, there's no other synergy with the Cyclone sort of stuff, so so it's a fun little gimmick, but yeah, it's not game breaking, and you can't really, there's not enough cards to sort of really build a strategy around it. That being said, if you do ever play Draft, and like I'm pretty sure almost no one plays Draft, unfortunately, even though I love the format. If you're ever playing Opus 5 Draft, I think if you pick up like a ton of these guys, and they're just commons as well, you can build a really, really sick draft deck with these Cyclone Wardens. I could potentially see, yeah, like some guy picking up maybe 5 or 6 of these, and their deck's just going to be super busted. But yeah, so outside of Draft, I don't think this guy is really going to see any play. Next, we have Saras Mobius. It's a 4 cost backup EX burst. When Saras enters the field, choose 1 Job Warrior Light in your break zone and add it to your hand. Pretty standard. We've seen a lot of these backups of very similar nature. Yeah, Warrior Light is going to be one of those archetypes that everyone really wants to try out. Everyone wants to play. There's a lot of Job Warrior of Light cards in that deck as well. So this card obviously works really well with that. Obviously, like early on, it's going to be a little bit less useful because like you're not going to have that many Job Warrior Lights in your break zone. But yeah, like the fact that it's an EX burst and the fact that you can play it later on to put them back from your break zone back to your hand, which allows you to trigger off Warrior Light's special ability or just use another wall or another Incas or whatever, is very good. And considering how Earth already has a wall in it, yeah, like very likely if you're playing a Warrior Light deck, you're going to have Earth in it. So that means you don't have to go outside of your cards in order to play this backup. So that's what makes it pretty solid and pretty good. So yeah, I do suspect Warrior Light decks to play at least 2 copies of this backup. Next, we have the second legendary for Earth for the set. It is Cecil. It is a 5 cost forward EX burst, actually 5 cost forward at 9000 power EX burst. When Cecil enters the field, choose 1 dull forward that opponent controls. If its cost is equal or less than the damage you have received, break it. And its S ability is Dark. Choose 1 forward. Cecil deals you 1 point of damage. If the cost of the forward is equal or less than the damage you've received, break it. So yeah, so we've spoken about this in one of the earlier previews. This is a pretty strong card, but it is a card that's very difficult to play, and definitely it's a card that more experienced players or more advanced players will be able to take a greater advantage of, and players who are more beginners won't really be able to balance or be able to use this cost effectively, I feel. So yeah, so I think this card is it's pretty powerful, but definitely it's not one of those easy cards to play. But in the hands of a of an experienced player, I think it's going to be very good. The fact that, yeah, like it can come in and like blow a dude up straight away, and the fact that it's 5+9,000 power forward is already pretty solid. The fact that it's EX burst as well really sort of builds into this like you receiving damage kind of theme. And its S ability is really easy to trigger off because there's like so many Cecils in the game, so you're going to be able to trigger off its S ability really easily. And yeah, just very unconditionally just kills a guy and you take a damage. Yeah, and then you kill the guy as long as you have more or equal damage than the cost of that forward. So yeah, so this is going to be one of the centerpiece cards in the like Earth Dark Knight deck. And yeah, so basically anytime effectively when you receive 3 damage or more, I feel this EX burst becomes live in the sense that most forwards in the game will be that 3 to 4 cost mark. So as soon as you receive that 3 or 4 damage, this card becomes a pretty deadly EX burst, and also just like becomes strong as a forward that you play. So this card is very, very powerful, and like do be prepared to deal with this card in the upcoming meta. Next is Durga. So this was one of those cards that was kind of partially released really early on, but no one knew its ability. But now we know. It is a 2-cost backup for Earth Doll. Put Durga in the break zone. Choose one character you control. It cannot be broken by opposing summons or abilities that don't deal damage this turn. Even though it says doesn't for this turn, they have clarified it to mean until the end of the turn. So Durga, Titan, and Cockatrice actually fulfill this very interesting triangle of protection effects that Earth has. So Cockatrice prevents your guys from receiving damage until the end of the turn, but the caveat is that they can't attack or block. Durga makes it so that character cannot be broken by summons or abilities that don't deal damage. So it protects the forward from whatever Cockatrice doesn't protect it from, and it has effectively no drawback. It's just a backup that you have to break. Whereas Titan prevents your forward from being broken at all, but it does have to dull it. So these 3 cards form a like very cool triangle of the different things that you can use to protect your forwards in different instances. And yeah, so like I think this card's pretty solid, and Earth has a bit of an issue with its 2-cost backups in that there's not a lot of great 2-cost backups that Earth decks want to play that can also break themselves. Monk is one of them, but Monk is a little bit expensive for its ability. And Durga I think is actually a pretty solid like 1 or 2 off for Earth decks to play. It isn't a card that's like going to be good in every matchup. Particularly, it's mainly going to be useful in lightning matchups. Potentially, it could be useful in fire matchups as well, and potentially in ice matchups as well. So Durga does have a bit of a narrow scope in terms of the cards it does protect against. But as a 1-off or 2-off in a deck, yeah, in those situations where it does come up, it is a very handy card to have. So yeah, so this card has a pretty solid ability, but it is very metagame dependent on like whether you run one in your deck or not. Next is Flanded, and man, like most of the monsters of this set are actually just underratedly good, or like they seem very underwhelming, but they're actually very powerful. So Flanded is a 1-cost monster. It's got Dull. Choose one forward your opponent controls. If your opponent doesn't pay 1, it cannot attack or block this turn. So recently I did a little bit of clarification. So yeah, so on resolution of this ability, so you use it on resolution of this ability, your opponent has to choose whether to pay 1 on resolution of the ability. And if they don't pay 1, that forward can't attack or block. So this is actually stupidly good in the sense that, like, yes, it does give your opponent the option to allow their forward to attack or block that turn, but they have to pay 1 straight off the bat. Now, this basically means is that this monster pretty much like will produce a CP advantage of 1 every turn, in the sense that like if your opponent's got a forward and you got someone that you want to attack with, you can flander their forward and they have to pay 1 if they want to block. Or if you have a bit of an open field, you can always use Flander on your opponent's turn right before your opponent wants to attack. So when they enter their combat phase, you can use Flander on one of their guys, and they have to choose whether or not they want to pay that 1 in order to attack you. So yeah, so this basically every time it reactivates allows you to create a 1 CP advantage. Now, if you have multiple of these, this can actually put up like a very huge CP advantage against your opponent. And so yeah, this card is like very, very strong. And the fact that it only costs 1 as a monster and it doesn't cost you any CP user's ability is actually very, very powerful. And being a monster means that it is immune to sort of like board clearing type effects. So yeah, this is a very strong control piece. And yeah, and if you're playing a control deck, and typically most control decks will have elements of Earth in it because they want to have access to Shantoto, Flander gives you another great tool for that. So I'm really looking forward to trying out Flander in certain decks. Spoiler alert, we got a mill deck coming in the near future, and Flander's going to be an instant part of that. Next, we got Berserker. It's a 4-cost forward at 9,000 power. It is a standard unit. Its effect is Berserker cannot block. So this card is a little bit underwhelming. It does have a power that's above its typical cost, and it does have a drawback to it. We had a previous card in a previous opus where you had a 3-cost forward that was 8,000 power, and that arguably is better than this Berserker because generally when you play a card that has a high power than its cost, you generally want them to be cheaper. Because then they're like much more of an aggressive card, and of course, because this card can't block, it does lend itself to be more of an aggressive card. But Earth already has so many quality 4-cost forwards already, in the form of Yang, in the form of Vincent, now in the form of Wall as well. That Berserker really gets pushed out of the metagame simply because he is not like one of those quality 4-cost forwards, and he has a drawback inherently attached to his body as well. So because of that, Berserker really has no place in the metagame. Generally just play any of the other number of super good Earth 4-cost forwards over this card. Next, we got Heal Gigas, and we were talking before about how so many monsters seem really good, and Heal Gigas is just like another monster that seems superly good. When a character an opponent controls uses an action ability, put Heal Gigas into break zone. If you do so, cancel its effect and break that character. So an action ability is any ability that uses the ellipses, so the 2 dots, so any sort of like cost payment type abilities, except for special abilities. I don't believe special abilities come under action abilities. So anytime your opponent wants to use like one of those payment abilities on a forward or a payment ability on a backup, Heal Gigas will be able to cancel out the effect and destroy that character as well. Only for one, and it's only for 1 CP as well. So this card is actually stupidly good value. So pretty much at some point you play this Heal Gigas. At some point, it's going to blow something up, and you would have just gotten an advantage straight away. So the downside is that you don't get to choose what your opponent does, but the fact that it's always threatening your opponent means that in a lot of cases it's just going to hold your opponent's activated abilities back, especially if they're on like powerful forwards or strong-bodied forwards. Heal Gigas is going to be able to lock a lot of it back. I really like this card, and it's amongst the like auto trigger abilities. This is probably among one of my favorites of the new ones from the set. Next, we have Star Sybil, and this is a card that everyone immediately looked at and said, man, this card is overpowered. This card is very, very strong, but again, it does not fall into like every Earth deck. It does fall into a certain specific deck, and like I've looked through a lot of cards in the past, and all those cards that fit in specific niches generally are the really powerful ones, and Star Sybil is that. It's a 5-cost backup EX burst. When Star Sybil enters the field, you may search for one category 11 character other than a card named Star Sybil and add it to your hand. So this is better than most searches in that most searches can only search for a forward. Star Sybil can actually search for any category 11 character, which does include Shantoto. So do keep that in mind. But that being said, it also includes a lot of other stuff as well. Not as much as potentially other categories. So Fire, you have Ayame and Volker. In Earth, you have Shantoto Prish, Camelot, Old Narc. The 2 dark cards are category 11. Wind has Lefna, Semi Lefna, and the other one. So there are category 11 characters in this game, but not too many of them. So you're not going to be able to build a primarily category 11 deck. You're just looking for specific targets that you want to have in your deck that you're going to use Star Sybil with. And that being said, Star Sybil has a secondary ability of Dull, put Star Sybil into the break zone, play 1 forward of cost 6 or less from your hand onto the field. You can only use this ability during your turn. So yeah, this is a strong ability. So it's just Dull, break this back up. That's actually stupidly good. A lot of times with these sort of cards, you generally have to pay some amount of CP. But in this case, Star Sybil does sort of like put the cost up front in that it's a 5-cost backup. It's a more expensive backup. That being said though, most of the backups that search your deck for a card are generally 3-cost backups. So effectively, you're really just paying 2 extra CP in order to have this ability to just put a guy that's cost 6 or less from your hand onto the field, which is like stupidly good. The math doesn't even like work out to be correct. It's just like really good value. And on top of that, it's EX burst. And on top of that, there's that wind backup that also reduces its cost by 2 as well. So if you can get this down to 3 cost, this card is stupidly good. It becomes on parity with all those other 3-cost backups that search your deck for a card. And then it's got the ability to break itself which allows you to play more copies of this card, then also allows you to play a forward with it. And then if you like add in like minor shenanigans, you can like recycle Star Sybils, and you can like recycle Prishes and like all that sort of crazy stuff. This card is actually stupidly good in specific decks. Really keen to try it out and show you some of the bullshit shenanigans that is available with this card. And it's in the Express as well. So there's nothing bad about this card. Next is Master Monk. It is a 4-cost standard unit forward at 8,000 power. For Earth 1 dull, choose up to 2 forwards, deal them, and Master Monk 4,000 damage. This card seems like a poor man's Dataluma. So they're both the same size, but Master Monk has to pay Earth 1 dull. And Dataluma is like every time he receives damage or is chosen by an ability, deal 4,000 damage. So yeah, Dataluma is way better, and Dataluma is not an expensive card. So unless specifically you need standard unit or you need FFTA 2, play Dataluma over Master Monk every single time. Next we have Mach Mobius. It is a 2-cost backup. For Earth dull, put Mach Mobius into break zone, search for 1 forward and add it to your hand. Now this is a really powerful ability in that I don't believe we've had any card in the game that just straight up says search for forward from your deck. Most of the time there's some sort of restriction, whether it's like Melweb that requires them to be water, or with all those other cards that require them to be a specific category. Mach Mobius allows you to search for anything. Now the downside of this card is that it does require double Earth. So this is going to be one of those cards that is generally going to be primarily in mono Earth decks, because yeah, double Earth dull is actually like not like, it's kind of an expensive cost to pay. Yeah, or you generally have to discard an Earth card for it. So any deck that plays this card is generally going to be like primarily pretty Earth or mono Earth. That being said though, Earth, like a problem with Earth is that it's got strong forwards, but a couple of its strong forwards require a card to pair up with them. And one of the big examples is Yang Ursula. If you have Yang and Ursula in your hand, they become a combination of 2 9,000 power forwards for 4 CP. Now the problem is that if you don't pair them up, they both become more mediocre, or they both become average, right? Now Mach Mobius gives Earth decks like a very consistent way to pair those up. Same with Vincent Yuffie and other decks, other forwards as well. So Mach Mobius actually provides a very good role in Earth, and now Earth has a lot of really good ways to search its deck for forwards in the case of Mach Mobius, or for backups in the form of Rydia. Earth is like looking to be a very consistent, powerful deck, and I think yeah, Mach Mobius just builds that very well. Next we got Momod. It is a 3-cost backup, so for pay 0 CP, so effectively free, choose 1 forward you control, it gains Brave until the end of the turn. You can only use this ability during your main phase and only once per turn. So yeah, it's a 3-cost backup that can give one of your guys Brave for a turn, which is a pretty solid ability to have. But that being said though, generally Earth, mono Earth decks, most of their forwards generally have Brave already, so this isn't going to be one of those cards that Earth is going to play in a mono Earth deck. That being said though, it does splash very well into like dual color decks, such as like, say for example, Earth Fire or Earth Water. Those are going to be decks that really do well with Momod, because yeah, they have forwards that are good in other ways, but generally they don't have Brave, and giving the Brave is very solid ability to have, and it costs you 0 CP, although yeah, you do spend a little bit extra for this backup to begin with. Do note that it says you have to use this ability during your main phase, so there will be times where people mess up by saying that they enter combat and then they activate this card. Yes, as soon as you enter combat, you can't use this ability anymore, so you have to stay in your main phase and do it before you declare any attacks. So yeah, that might catch some people off guard a little bit, but otherwise it's a very solid card, but it tends to be more of a dual colored card over anything else. Next we have Yang. It is a 5-cost forward at 9,000 power. Yang cannot become dull by your opponent's summons or ability. So it's got the same ability that Guy has, and if you control 5 or more Earth characters, Yang gains plus 1,000 power and Brave. So yeah, so it's very similar to Guy. It's a little bit bigger, it's a little bit more costlier. Yeah. And like it's a little bit more conditional in that you have to have 5 or more Earth forwards for it to gain Brave, which isn't too difficult to do considering it is a 5-cost forward. So if you have 3 backups and you have another forward down, then it is going to be able to trigger off this ability. Or if you have like, yeah, just like 4 backups, because it does Yang does include itself as an Earth character, so you only really need to have 4 additional Earth characters, which include backups and monsters as well, for that matter. So it's a pretty easy condition to fulfill. and making it 10,000 power brave, plus any sort of additional modifiers or buffs such as like Anna Crow. Yeah, just makes it pretty solid and gives Earth another way to make ice decks, like give ice decks a big problem. So yeah, so it's probably a pretty solid card. And if ice like becomes like even more powerful, then yeah, potentially you might see like yeah, 1 or 2 copies of Gaia and 1 or 2 copies of Yang, and that's just going to allow Earth decks to just crush through every ice deck pretty much in the game. Next, we have Lannister. It is a 5-cost forward standard unit. For each point of damage you receive, Lannister gains plus 1,000 power. So this is basically another standard unit forward that's basically the same as all those Dark Knights that we saw in Opus 1, where they gain additional power for each damage you have received. Yeah, very similar to Berserker that we spoke about earlier in this video. This card being a 5-cost forward makes it a little bit too expensive to sort of like really get the value out of this card. So yes, it effectively has the same buff as all those other forwards. In that most of the time you generally need at least 2 or 3 damage in order for the forward to sort of be on par with other forwards of its cost. So yeah, so it is a 5-cost forward at 7,000 power. So you generally need 2 damage for this forward to be on par with your other forwards of the same cost, right? Now, only after 3 damage onwards, this card becomes more powerful than other 5-cost Earth forwards. That being said, though, this is kind of like one of those situations where you don't need any additional power. So generally, once you get to that 10,000 power mark, most of the time you don't really need to go any higher than that. So yeah, so most of the time your like 3-cost and your 4-cost Dark Knights or like Warrior of Antiquity and so on, they're going to be around that 8,000, 9,000 power mark. And yeah, so Lannister for that same amount of damage, you're spending 5 CP to get a guy that's maybe 11 or 12,000 power. You generally don't need a forward that powerful or like that high power, because generally it's just going to be bigger than most guys in the game, and any sort of destruction ability is going to kill Lannister same way as any other forward. So yeah, so that being said, I don't think that this card is going to see play even in the Dark Knight damage yourself deck, because this card's a little bit too costly. And any sort of strategy like where you want to receive damage, you're going to be playing as like the new Dark Knight legendary Cecil instead of Lannister as your 5-cost forward. So yeah, so this card is not going to see play, both because it's like a little bit too expensive, and it also like clashes with the slot of the central card for the deck. And that's it for all the Earth cards for Opus 5. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. What do you guys think about the cards? What are some interesting strategies that you guys want to build? Yeah, let me know if I might have missed anything, or what are some cool combos you think are going to happen with the new cards of the set. Do let me know. And yeah, if you enjoyed this video, please thumbs up and subscribe. It helps out with the YouTube algorithms and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, I'll be back tomorrow with the lightning cards of the set. So until next time, Grand J out.